Let's build off of that perfect transition because we can't ignore the biggest story of the weekend. We're going to title this segment "What's Worse," which really it's just a matter of talking about what's worse in baseball right now. Spencer Strider and Shane Bieber. We're going to start with Strider, although we don't know yet if he is ultimately going to need Tommy John surgery, but it's a UCL injury. Right now, he's on the 15-day IL with a sprained UCL. He's getting more opinions from more doctors. Hopefully it's not that, but we all kind of feel like it might be trending that way. I mean, just in general, just every week, pitchers are dropping like flies. How can baseball combat this? Or will they even attempt to? Or is it just going to be kind of a recycle? We're just going to keep cycling through arms. You're going to go down. You're going to be out for a couple of years. The next young guy is going to throw 100, comes up. It's just crazy.
I think baseball is trying to get away from that, but we are going to see that, I think, for a few more years until the ship can right itself. One of the things that baseball and baseball minded people inside the game at the top of the game want to do is get back to solid starting pitching, going consistently 6 and 7 innings. And obviously, you can't do that if you're on the IL. And it's harder to do that when you have an entire bullpen full of guys throwing in the upper 90s, which is something that teams want. So it is a bit of a contradiction for teams to both want velocity, but they also want health. You kind of can't have it both ways. You need to have a little bit of a little bit of patience. And to your point, it's almost like, well, I've got three guys. In the past, it would be if you had three players to choose between, you had to pick one of them and kind of stick with them for just a little bit to see how it would work out before you can move on to option B or option C. Whereas now you go with option A and you just have them throw until the wheels fall off. And then when he gets hurt, you're done for a year. Let's go to option B. You pitch until you break down, and then you go to option C. And I think baseball wants to really get away from that. And they've got a lot of answers to a lot of questions that they need to answer, especially if you ask Tony Clark, head of the MLB Players Association.
Yeah, it's an epidemic, really. It's crazy. It just does not stop. And you got to go into a season if you're trying to compete and have, 8, 9, 10 guys on the depth chart because you just don't know when guys are going to drop off. Speaking specifically to the Braves now losing Strider, I do think they have enough depth to be fine in the regular season. I'm not going to say, oh, now let's just say Strider does end up going down. The Braves are going to all of a sudden, not win the NL East. I think there's still, even without Strider, the clear favorites. You look at that rotation. Right now they called up Alan Winans to take Strider's spot, but Bryce Elder just started on Saturday. I would think at some point Elder gets a spot back in that rotation. He was an all-star last year, so their rotation still looks solid. It's Max Fried, Charlie Morton, Chris Sale, Ronaldo Lopez. Talk about converted reliever. Now he's even further from getting bounced from that rotation. And Bryce Elder, eventually, right now, Alan Winans. They still have AJ Smith-Shawver, a top prospect that came up last year. He could end up taking some starts this year. Dylan Dodd in AAA. We saw him last season. And then Ian Anderson recovering from Tommy John, who could be back midseason. So what do you think just about the Braves being able to get through the regular season here?
Yeah, they definitely have the depth of starting pitchers on the 40-man roster. Darius Vines, Oscar Inoa. Also, those are two more options that you hope you don't have to get there. You don't have to go to that route. But I think they've got the depth to get it done. The thing that becomes problematic for Atlanta more so than Cleveland in this Shane Bieber versus Spencer Strider, whose injury is the worst, is the fact that Atlanta's minor league system has been a little bit depleted over the last couple off seasons, going out and acquiring both Sean Murphy and Matt Olson from the A's in separate deals. So their farm system has obviously taken a hit. Even getting Chris Sale, you lose a guy like Vaughn Grissom. So they're not going to be able to make those moves at the trade deadline and offload some of that young talent because, frankly, their young talent isn't going to be the same match as so many other teams out there, coupled with the fact that there aren't too many options right now for players that can go. Maybe you got like a Jesus Luzardo, but with how much time he has left until free agency, that's going to be a premium price for teams to have to pay in order to get Marlins' best pitcher. And they also have lost a guy too in Yuri Perez. So the injury bug has bitten everyone in a different way, it seems like.
Absolutely. And you're right. I mean, Shane Bieber would have been a guy like, oh, maybe you can get Bieber. Now you can't. I think that the pressure really is on, for one, Max Fried. I mean, this is his contract year going into free agency. They need Fried to now be an ace even more so because Spencer Strider, I think, was the most given answer they had atop that rotation. You just knew that he was a guy that you could count on all season. And when it came to playoff time, he was going to be able to step up and take the ball game one. Now it's on Fried, Charlie Morton, and Chris Sale, too. I mean, these guys are like longer into their careers. We don't know how much of their prime is left. So those three now are really, really imperative. And who knows, maybe it is a Smith Shawver or a Bryce Elder that eventually steps up with a bigger role. But I think come playoff time, that's where this injury is really going to be felt. And that's assuming he can't go, because maybe we get best case scenario and it's just a rest. Maybe he gets an injection or something and Strider can come back for that postseason run. But I think that's where they will really feel this.
Yeah, that Reynaldo Lopez signing in the offseason really looks like that much more of a genius move, a swing man that if he does well, he's in the rotation. Well, he's definitely going to be staying in the rotation for the foreseeable future for Atlanta right now.
Absolutely. And one last note on Strider. I just found his contract really interesting now because we all remember he signed that extension. I believe it was 6 years, 75 million. This year he's making $1 million. Next year, when he potentially could be rehabbing, he's making $4 million. If he does go down, when he comes back, that's where the contract actually ticked up. So good on Strider for getting that guaranteed money because he'll have 20 million coming his way in 2026, 22 in both 27 and 28, and a $22 million club option in 2029. So contractually, he's locked in. No worries there on his end. The Braves have him locked up for whatever happens here. Shane Bieber, when it comes to the contract, this is where it really hurts the Guardians. Now, we'll talk about how they can get by without him, because I still think this is a team that has been so good at developing pitching that the Guardians could still win the Central. I don't think that this takes them out of it, but you lose an asset here. And I remember when Dylan Cease got traded, some people were saying, did they sell too soon? Could he have improved his stock at the deadline? This is exactly why you take the package in front of you when you can. Imagine the Orioles called up the Guardians at some point this offseason for Shane Bieber. And you might not have got the same package for Corbin Burns, but maybe you could have got Joey Ortiz to be your shortstop this year. And you held on to Bieber expecting a bounce back. Granted, it seemed like he was on his way to that, but now you lose the asset. And, for Bieber, now he's heading into free agency off of Tommy John.
It's similar to that Brandon Woodruff situation with Milwaukee, where they're both sides are really kind of screwed in many ways, and you hate to see that for an ace like Shane Bieber going down, especially at the same time as so many of these other guys. It's wild that it all happens like that. But yeah, Cleveland really left out in the cold, because when you've got your ace gone, everybody else slides up, and there's a reason that there's a term called the number 2 starter, because you just don't have that it factor to be a number 1 just yet. And that's not a knock on those number 2 guys, but they're great in that role. All of a sudden, everybody's role changes, and that can really just put a club at a major disadvantage. And in a very winnable division like the AL Central, which we will also get to, that's going to really ding Cleveland in a big way this entire season.
It will. And I think the good thing for them is they will have Gavin Williams coming back here. He had an elbow injury in spring, another one, but no Tommy John. He's working his way back. He's ramping up. So that's the eventual replacement here is he's going to be able to slide into that rotation. They haven't made a decision about who's going to grab a spot yet. I believe they had an off day where they're able to sort of kick the can down the road a little bit on this. But when Gavin Williams was going to come up, Carlos Carrasco was looking like the odd man out. Now Carrasco signed on a minor league deal, brought him back to where he spent a large portion of his career. He might be a fixture in this rotation. And I watched Carrasco pitch the last couple of years, and it's very hit or miss. So I have a question for you, Patrick. I set the over-under at 121 innings pitched. Now, how I got to that was 2022, he threw 152 innings for the Mets. Good year. I think his ERA was in the 3.6s. Last year, he threw 90 innings for the Mets. So I combined the two. I divided it. I came up with that line, 121 innings. Would you take the over or the under on that for Carlos Carrasco this year?
I'm going to take the over on that. I am, because going back to what I was saying before about the roles and the job that's at hand, Stephen Vogt and his staff of coaches are going to talk to Carlos Carrasco, a veteran, and talk to all those young guys. But I think it's easier to get through to someone like Carrasco, who's in a no lose situation. He can go out there and trust the coaching staff and say, when they say, eat up innings, like it's fine. We're going to leave you out there maybe a little bit. Don't worry about the ERA because you've got a spot here. And he's had his career already. Where those young guys, they can hear that, but they know they're still trying to establish themselves in a big way. So it's hard to maybe, sit back and have a different approach to look at, more quantity of innings rather than quality of innings. Whereas Carrasco, his job, I think, is going to be more getting that quantity. And so I think it's for that reason he's going to be over that mark.
I think that's a great point. Yeah, because sometimes you need that pitcher to just sort of go out there, and if they're left out to dry, just eat them up. And Carrasco can do that. I think it helps that he's pitching in a division that has a lot of big ballparks. A guy that can hopefully pitch to contact, not walk too many, and try to hang in there. But yeah, when you lose Bieber, who is going to be a big source of innings, maybe even more of a reason to sort of ignore what that ERA says. This is a veteran. He's going to show up every fifth day, be prepared. And some days it'll be great. There will be days where Carrasco will get the ball hit hard in the right places, and he can last. But yeah, he's a really important piece. Now the other guys have to step up. You got Tyler Beatty, who was a longman who could get stretched out. Ben Lively, Xavier Curry, Joey Quintillo is their top prospect. So they got some options, but it's one of those situations here with the Guardians where you're just hoping that that pitching farm can just give you another arm that's going to jump out like they did with a couple guys last year.
It's true. It's true. And I think Vogt has to really protect a lot of those young guys as well. I think that's another component to it where I don't think you want 5 really young starters like Cleveland could possibly have if you subtract Carrasco from that rotation. And then when you do something like that, you could overexpose those young players, which thereby overexposes your bullpen, which has a lot of good young arms in it as well. So it's definitely a balancing act in many ways. And overall, I think it just becomes a little bit more stable with a veteran guy like a Carlos Carrasco in that rotation, even if he's giving you something closer to a 5 ERA. You're going to take that if he's eating up the innings.
Absolutely. And I think also what we need to see is you're going to need to see it in Cleveland. Tristan McKenzie, can he be a frontline guy? Tanner Bybee coming off a good rookie season. Logan Allen, can these guys take that next step? Because we thought at some point they would have to do it. But again, we were sort of circling the end of July maybe when they'd have to fill in that role atop the rotation. Now they're front and center in this division.
Yeah, Cleveland, that's rough between the Bieber injury in Cleveland, Royce Lewis in Minnesota, the Tigers, Royals, their White Sox, maybe even to a degree. They're looking around going, oh man, I hope we're not next.